No region in Africa exported more enslaved people than Angola. From the lush river valleys of the interior to the fortified ports of Luanda and Benguela, Angola became the engine room of the transatlantic slave trade. Nearly 5 million Africans were shipped from its shores, the vast majority bound for Brazil. Angola was not just another part of the trade, it was its central artery. The Portuguese, among the first Europeans to reach West Central Africa in the late 15th century, would remain the dominant imperial force in the region for centuries. Their foothold became a sprawling network of forts, missions, military garrisons, and trade posts. But they didn't conquer alone. They exploited internal rivalries, manipulated African rulers, and armed mercenary war bands to ensure a steady flow of captives. This is the story of Angola, where conquest met commerce, where diplomacy became betrayal, and where one of the greatest crimes in human history was made systematic, profitable, and nearly unstoppable. Before it became a center of the transatlantic slave trade, the region we now call Angola was home to a number of organized African kingdoms, most notably the Kingdom of Congo. Founded sometime before the 14th century, straddling parts of present-day Angola, the Republic of Congo, and Gabon, was one of the first African powers to engage with Europeans. Once a thriving political and cultural force, it became entangled in a system that would ultimately lead to its disintegration. Congo had a centralized administration, a strong agricultural base, and a well-established regional trade network long before Europeans arrived. When Portuguese explorers reached the mouth of the Congo River in the 1480s, they found an African kingdom with its own aristocracy, governance, and complex social structure. Seeing opportunity, Congo's ruling elite engaged with the newcomers, forming diplomatic alliances, exchanging envoys, and exploring the spiritual and material benefits of contact. Before the arrival of Europeans, slavery existed across many parts of Central Africa, including the regions that would become Angola, but it looked very different from the transatlantic system that followed. In the Kingdom of Congo and surrounding societies, slavery was typically not based on race or heredity. Most enslaved individuals were captives taken during warfare, criminals, or those who had fallen into debt. These people could often be integrated into households, married into local communities, or even rise to positions of influence. Slavery in these societies was not a primary engine of the economy, nor was it the foundation of state power. It was a byproduct of internal conflict and judicial punishment, not an industry built on exports. That changed with the arrival of the Portuguese. What had once been a marginal institution became the central pillar of Angola's colonial economy. The first contact between the Kingdom of Congo and the Portuguese was likely led by the explorer Diogo Cao, who reached the Congo River in the 1480s. This encounter initiated diplomatic exchanges between the Congo monarchy and the Portuguese crown. The Congo king at the time, Nzinga Nkuvu, welcomed the Portuguese and formed a strategic alliance. In 1491, he converted to Christianity and adopted the name João I. This alliance involved the exchange of gifts, cultural envoys, and trade. While the Congo elite viewed this as a mutual diplomatic relationship, the Portuguese viewed it as an opportunity, using friendship as a facade while quietly working to destabilize the kingdom and seize control. King Nkuvu's engagement was driven by interest in European goods and military technology. He hoped this alliance would help consolidate his rule and expand his influence over rival polities. However, this partnership also opened the door for deeper Portuguese involvement in regional politics and eventually in the slave trade. But as the trade spiraled out of control, he saw his realm unraveling. Lawlessness spread. Rival factions grew rich by selling captives directly to the Portuguese. Noble families turned on each other. Portuguese agents began arming local leaders in exchange for human lives. Afonso I wrote desperate letters to the Portuguese crown, pleading for restraint. He condemned the chaos and warned that the kingdom was being consumed from within. Not knowing he was just informing the Portuguese king of the success of their secret plans to destabilize his kingdom. He condemned the kidnapping of free citizens and the corruption of officials, yet he continued regulated trade to maintain diplomatic and economic ties. Then came a turning point. In 1575, Paulo Dias de Novaes arrived with 700 settlers and soldiers, armed with royal charters and a mandate to establish Portuguese rule, and founded Luanda. This marked the beginning of true colonization. Despite the threat it posed, the king likely believed that diplomacy could contain Portuguese ambitions, but Luanda grew quickly, becoming the center of a new, more aggressive phase of colonization and enslavement, one the Congo monarchy could no longer control. As the slave trade expanded, the Portuguese no longer relied solely on diplomacy. They began bypassing the king altogether, striking deals directly with regional nobles, warlords, and mercenary raiders. European merchants built relationships with anyone who could supply captives, undermining the king's authority and disrupting the kingdom's social order. Founded in 1575, Luanda was the first major European colony in sub-Saharan Africa. Designed explicitly for trade, it quickly grew into a major slave port, complete with fortresses, auction blocks, holding pens, and dockyards. The city became the launching point for millions of Africans bound for the Americas. To the south, the port of Benguela was established in 1617, eventually exporting hundreds of thousands more. These ports were not simply waypoints. They were processing centers of human suffering. Marches from the interior could take weeks. Captives were held in barracoons, subjected to inspections, branded, baptized, and sold. European merchants, missionaries, and soldiers operated alongside African collaborators. Local rulers, merchants, and warlords raided inland, capturing people through war, debt, or pure kidnapping. Payment came in the form of muskets, gunpowder, cloth, beads, and alcohol, all designed to sustain the trade. As the Portuguese expanded their power in Luanda and Benguela, their influence over the Kingdom of Congo became increasingly corrosive. Later kings found themselves overwhelmed. By the early 1600s, Congo had fractured under the weight of external interference and internal strife. Rival claimants to the throne were backed by different Portuguese factions, each seeking to install a puppet willing to support their trading ambitions. Civil wars erupted, further weakening central authority. The Portuguese used these divisions to their advantage, forging alliances with breakaway provinces, arming rival noble houses, and establishing semi-independent Portuguese enclaves deep within Congo territory. Though nominally allies, the Portuguese increasingly treated Congo as a dependency. By the mid-1600s, the once proud kingdom had lost much of its autonomy. The royal court's influence was confined, and its ability to regulate the slave trade all but collapsed. Portuguese interests now dominated the coast and interior corridors. But this decline also birthed resistance. Enslaved people fled to remote areas and formed quilombos, runaway slave communities that resisted both Portuguese and local authorities. Some of these communities grew large enough to pose military threats. This period of resistance also saw the rise of new leaders. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba. Nzinga was born around 1583 into the royal family of Ndongo, one of the major kingdoms in the region that would become Angola. Ndongo, like Congo, had experienced early Portuguese contact and had attempted to maintain a delicate balance between diplomacy and self-rule. But by the early 1600s, the Portuguese were no longer content with trade agreements. They wanted domination. In 1622, King Mbande, Nzinga's brother, sent her to negotiate with the Portuguese in Luanda after years of raids, forced tribute, and territorial pressure. The negotiations temporarily succeeded. Nzinga secured a peace treaty and the withdrawal of Portuguese troops from some Ndongo territories. She even converted to Christianity, adopting the name Ana de Sousa in a strategic move to gain Portuguese favor. But the peace was short-lived. Within a few years, Portugal resumed its incursions, undermined the treaty, and supported rival claimants to the throne of Ndongo. In response, Nzinga took power herself. After her brother's death, she declared herself queen, a controversial and unprecedented move. Facing internal opposition and Portuguese-backed aggression, she led her people into the mountains and began to forge a new base of resistance in Matamba, a neighboring kingdom she eventually conquered. From her capital in Matamba, Nzinga reorganized her forces, formed alliances with other African powers, and launched a prolonged guerrilla war against the Portuguese. She welcomed runaway slaves and Portuguese-trained African soldiers into her army, offering them freedom and land in exchange for loyalty. Nzinga was not only a warrior, she was a shrewd tactician and a master of political survival. She played the Dutch and Portuguese against each other, leveraged trade routes, and sustained resistance for nearly 40 years. Under her leadership, Matamba became a militarized refuge, a hub of commerce, and a symbol of African defiance. Nzinga died in 1663 at the age of 80, still ruling, still resisting. Unlike Brazil, where vast territories were claimed with relative ease, Angola proved far more difficult to conquer. The Portuguese faced organized African kingdoms, entrenched political systems, and fierce resistance. They couldn't simply plant a flag. They had to manipulate, divide, and wage war for centuries to gain control. After her death, Matamba continued to resist Portuguese control for decades. Her legacy would live on in both legend and reality, as a queen who defied empire, outmaneuvered European diplomats, and refused to surrender her people's autonomy. The Portuguese, now entrenched in Luanda, increasingly viewed Congo not as a sovereign ally, but as territory to be subdued. They interfered in royal successions, armed rival factions, and encouraged proxy wars to weaken the kingdom from within. One of the most significant turning points came in 1665 at the Battle of Mbwila. The Congo king Antonio I led an army to confront Portuguese forces who had crossed into Congo territory. The resulting battle was a disaster. Antonio I was killed, along with many of his nobles. The loss decimated Congo's leadership and shattered its central authority. What followed was a prolonged civil war that lasted decades. With the capital of San Salvador in ruins, rival families vied for control. Portuguese-backed militias and mercenaries pillaged the countryside. Slave raids escalated. The Congo heartland, once an organized and literate society, became a fragmented, unstable region, ripe for colonial absorption. The Portuguese took advantage of the chaos. They expanded their influence further into the interior, striking deals with new warlords, fortifying their trade routes, and turning entire provinces into slave hunting grounds. The Kingdom of Congo, though it would never be fully conquered in a formal sense, lost its ability to function as a unified state. By the early 1700s, Congo had been effectively sidelined as a political force. Its cities were depopulated, its institutions collapsed, and its people were scattered, many ending up in the barracoons of Luanda and Benguela, destined for slavery in Brazil. The collapse of Congo was not just the fall of a kingdom, it was the destruction of one of Africa's most sophisticated pre-colonial states. A society that once sent ambassadors to Europe, adopted Christianity on its own terms, and governed a multi-ethnic empire was dismantled, not through outright conquest, but through manipulation, exploitation, and relentless extraction. This was the price of proximity to empire. Those who resisted, like Nzinga, paid in blood. Those who collaborated, like Congo's fractured nobility, were discarded when they no longer served European interests. By the late 1700s and into the 1800s, the Portuguese had shifted from indirect influence to direct conquest. Entire regions of Angola were militarily subdued, with African rulers deposed or reduced to vassals. Any pretense of diplomacy was stripped away. The transatlantic slave trade had become industrialized, and Angola was its engine. With the collapse of effective resistance, Portuguese slavers moved deeper into the interior, often supported by Brazilian merchants and local mercenaries. They established fortified stations and caravan routes, enabling the systematic capture and export of human beings on a massive scale. Villages were razed, populations were displaced, children were separated from families. The demographic collapse was staggering. Some estimates suggest that regions lost up to half their population within a generation. Angola's economy became entirely dependent on human exports. Even after the formal abolition of the slave trade in the 19th century, the practice persisted in the form of forced labor, indentured servitude, and coerced colonial labor schemes. By the time European colonialism was formalized in the late 1800s, Angola had already been gutted by centuries of exploitation. Its wealth was drained, its people scattered, and its kingdoms destroyed. The Portuguese called it a colony, but in truth, it was a wound, one that never fully healed. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the past. See you in the next video. Banna, sango, sango.